Good morning, everyone. Happy Monday. Welcome to the first ever video in English that we, as the Roosevelt Movement, has ever done. This is the first of our long series, hopefully, of videos. Let me introduce you right away to Marco Moiso, who is the Vice President of the Roosevelt Movement. Let me also introduce myself. My name is Emanuele Barrasso, and I'm the UK Secretary of the Roosevelt Movement. Marco, good morning.
Hello, Emanuele. Hello, everyone.
Hello, everyone. So the purpose of this video, we've done sort of videos in Italian, since the very beginning, but this is the first ever video in English because we want to sort of spread our word, the mission of the Roosevelt Movement, also to the UK, so to the English-speaking public. Marco, can we start off by saying who are we? What is the Roosevelt Movement, and what is our mission in society?
So we, the Roosevelt Movement in the UK, call ourselves the Roosevelt Movement, where we are born out of an Italian political movement that's called the Movimento Roosevelt. And our movement has got a mission to promote and defend the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that was signed at the United Nations on 10th December 1948. We do not only do that, we try and bring to life those values and principles by casting our eye on the social, economical, and political happenings around the world. And what we do is we try and work with different political parties to ensure that their policies work towards the realization of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and its principles. What we try and do, what we noticed over the years, is that political parties tend to suffer from what we call the tribalism syndrome. So people feel that they belong to a tribe, the left-wing tribe, the right-wing tribe, the liberal tribe, the socialist tribe, and they struggle to see the other parts, their counterparts' arguments and their reasons. What we try and do is navigate the political debate, looking at the reasons of both sides, and look at which element of everyone's policies can actually work together in the pursuit of a realization of the principle expressed in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So I guess the idea is for us to catch up every month, maybe during these meetings, do one of these videos, right? And basically look at what happened during that month or the previous months, and try and discuss what our point of view would be in terms of what political parties should, or what were the most important issues that took place on the previous month. Is that what we're am I right? Is this what we're doing?
Absolutely. This is also exactly our aim is to catch up every month, to go through all the most important events, and also I think because it's our very first sort of series of videos in English, I think what we should also try to do is to spread, our message, our ideas, our values and principles to the wider public. And do you think it's fair to say that the Roosevelt Movement is trying to unite and to put together what is sparse? Like a big puzzle.
Yeah. I think, as I said, we often talk about progressive people. Now, progressive is an interesting definition because of neoliberalism, the economical theories that people call neoliberalism. We see a progressive destruction of the welfare system and of a number of social rights that were achieved during the 20th century. So talking about being progressive is if we go towards the destruction of what was hardly conquered during the years, of course, that's not our idea of being progressive. What we are trying to do is, I'd rather prefer to be a conservative in that point, from that perspective. I'd try to preserve all of the social rights that we've managed to defend through our political activities during the 20th century. But we are trying to define what progressive means. And progressive, from one point of view, comes being progressive, having a progressive political agenda that upholds the values of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, means being able to be coherently progressive by ensuring that people's economical rights, social rights, and civil rights are all promoted and defended through legislative action, really.
Cool. So our progressivism is an all-rounder. Is about human rights, social rights, but as you just mentioned, a very important point, economic rights. You just mentioned actually a word, which is neoliberalism, which is probably the one ideology that we try to challenge in all our political activity, in our sort of documents, debates, and events. Marco, can you please tell us what is neoliberalism? Because if you ask if you ask most of the people you would ask this question to, they probably wouldn't know what neoliberalism is. They would make a difference between capitalism, communism, socialism, but neoliberalism as a term, most people probably wouldn't even know what there is. Can you please give us a definition of it? And also, why do you think it's such a ghost ideology that not many people know about?
Yes, of course. So, when we hear people talking about economy in the news, at the BBC, on the newspaper, we hear a lot of journalists or economists talking as if economy were an exact science. And that's not really true. There are different economical models that usually would uphold different views of society. In the past, it was very clear the difference between communism, socialism, liberalism, and so on. Now, if you look at the economical model that was used to build a wealthy society like the British society or the European society after the Second World War, was based on the liberal theories of John Maynard Keynes and then of liberal economists like William Beveridge. It's quite funny because when you hear people talking about the welfare state, most people think that it's a socialist thing to talk about welfare system. But actually, the welfare system in the UK that then was replicated across Europe and across other countries in the world was actually developed by Sir William Beveridge, who was a member of the Liberal Party that was called by the Attlee government after the Second World War to develop the welfare system. So when we talk about liberalism, we actually talk about a political theory that wants... Well, we're not going to be explaining here in much details. We might do it another time. But really what we're trying to look is to find the right balance between personal freedom and social justice. This is what liberalism tried to do after the Second World War. And also through economical programs like the Marshall Plan. Now, the liberal economical theories were leveraged in Europe from 1945 to the 70s, at least to 1973 during the first oil crisis. From that moment onwards, there was a progressive shift towards another economical model called neoliberalism. Neoliberalism was developed mainly, the first theorist of the neoliberal economical theory is Friedrich A. von Hayek, And then, of course, he had his pupils like Milton Friedman, who wrote important books like Capitalism and Freedom, or there are other important philosophers and economists like Nozick, who contributed to the development of the neoliberal economical theory. But this economical theory had the arrogance has the arrogance nowadays to present itself as the only economical theory that's viable in a modern complex world. And that is not true, absolutely not true. And that's why this economical theory has become, actually it's quite interesting. There is a nice book by Professor Harari. I don't know whether you guys have read Homo Deus. It's a very interesting book, but also Homo Sapiens is another interesting book, when he defines some economical and political theories as religion. And neoliberalism has become such a strong ideology full of dogmas that now it's kind of become a religion. Now we all believe that we need to cut on social expenditure because it's a good thing. We all believe that it's good to cut on public debt. We all believe that deregulation is particularly good to create the right conditions for competitions. We believe that ideologies are misleading and that we are past ideology, but actually it was von Hayek that criticized the role that ideologies played in creating a sense of common well-being, and therefore it was part of the neoliberal ideology to say that we are past ideologies. But really, just from a general perspective, neoliberalism advocated for the rule of the markets over the rule of politics and politicians. Yes. And this is what we see nowadays. We see that across Europe, across the world, politicians are forced to organize their legislative action within the boundaries set by the financial economy and then by the real economy. Until the 70s, this relationship was reversed. We had politicians that were using economical theories to sustain and boost the real economy, and they were using the financial economy to boost the real economy. So neoliberalism is a theory, an economical theory that reversed the relationship between finance, economy, and politics. And we believe that this has got profound implication from the point of view of real democracy, and that is something that is the reason why we try and criticize as much as possible neoliberalism when there are shortfalls from it.
And I think it's very interesting what you just said about is an ideology against sort of all ideologies. I mean, this is how we initially got sort of was formulated, was defined. Also, this kind of dogmatic aura around neoliberalism, and also because not many people know what it is. Sometimes they get confused with, as you just said, there's like liberalism, which is completely different. I think it's all part of the same kind of plan to make it as invisible in a way as possible, just like a dogma. You also mentioned that neoliberalism started to flourish in a way, or maybe not flourish, but it was initiated around the 1973, sort of 1975. We are in England. We both live in London, and you mentioned, William Beveridge, the welfare state. The UK and the political sort of situation in the UK back in the late 70s, did it help to make, let's say, neoliberalism flourish? Were there any politicians in the UK, or, as I said, let me just highlight the fact that we are in the UK, so I think the UK context of it is actually really important. Any politicians helped, in a way, neoliberalism flourish?
definitely. I think so. As I was saying, truth is that neoliberalism was first tested as an economical theory in Africa during the 70s. There is a brilliant Italian book there is a brilliant book about the topic of neoliberalism in Africa that's written by Ilaria Bifarini. And I would really recommend it to anyone who wants to know more about how the former colonial powers maintained their grip over Africa after the end of colonialism. But as I said, the economical theory that's called neoliberalism was tested in Africa starting from the 70s, and then after those theories were tested there, they started arriving to Europe, and Margaret Thatcher played a very important role in ensuring that these theories arrived in the European Union. She also, it's interesting because we've often heard from her saying that there is no other way. The truth is that she knew that the world was going through deep changes. In 1975, was published a document by the Trilateral Commission, and the document is called The Crisis of Democracy. And in this document, the Trilateral Commission actually denounced exactly that in the modern democratic world, there was too much democracy, and that there should have been an involution in terms of the degree of democracy driven by leveraging the financial powers. Margaret Thatcher knew that very well. And she also saw an opportunity for the UK to establish itself as one of the main powers to leverage this shift in economical paradigm. So we know that she completely converted the economy from being an economy that was quite the Industrial Revolution took place in the UK, but at the same time, the UK was the first country in Europe to invest heavily in the third sector, in the financial sector, in the services sector, and from that moment onwards, we have really seen the UK being the leading economy in terms of advocating for that rule of the market over politics. And we've seen it even with an important role that so-called progressive leaders like Tony Blair had in the UK. One of the dogmas of neoliberalism, for example, is the idea that private banks, that central banks have to be private. Until after the Second World War, there was an idea that currency was something that belonged to the people, and that it's gone through phases. We know that in the United States at the beginning was the amount of gold that could be circulated was linked to the reserves of gold. Then we've seen that from 1971, we've seen the end of the so-called gold standard. But basically, there was an idea where currency it was something that belonged to the people. With the advent of neoliberalism, we see a complete shift in terms of monetary policies, and I'm oversimplifying all of this, but basically the idea that the currency should be managed by private institutions spread very quickly across Europe and the Western world, and the UK in 1996 was one of the countries that did one of the most radical changes, because until that moment, monetary policies in the UK were in the hand of the parliament, and then Tony Blair did something that was not in his political program when he ran for election, and he created the Commission of the Nine that still rules and decides the economical policies of the UK nowadays. And that Commission of the Nine is made by 9 members, 5 of which are people who come from the Bank of England, and 4 are representative of the government, which automatically has taken away the responsibility of monetary policies from the government and given it to a bank. And the same thing, if you look at what happened across Europe, in terms of banking environment, the same thing that happened in the UK happened all across Europe. Nowadays, okay, but it's interesting. Sorry, go on.
I think you mentioned something really, really interesting. You mentioned 2 names: Margaret Thatcher, who was a Tory politician, Tory leader, for I think he ruled in Britain for about 11 years, up until 1990. And then you also mentioned Tony Blair, who ruled Britain from 1997 to 2007. These are 2 leaders of two completely different parties, the Tories and the Labour. And I think it all goes back to your point about what means being truly progressive. Why do you think these, all these politicians coming from across the political spectrum, they adhere to neoliberalism? Why are there so many politicians from the left side of the fence and the right side of the fence? Is it fair to say that neoliberalism sort of cuts across the political parties, and those people that sort of welcome all the sort of rules and laws of neoliberalism, they come from sort of different parties and different sides of the political spectrum?
Yes, 100%. There are authors. There are interesting documents that are coming up nowadays that will link people like Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair to specific groups of power, financial groups of power, Masonic groups of power. There are people nowadays that talk about how really powerful institutions like the Trilateral Commission managed to infiltrate political parties, not only in the UK but around the world, and in such a way that could promote a specific political agenda consisting in the involution of our democracies in terms of in a technocratic direction, if you want. It's quite interesting in the UK because, as I said, the UK was one of the first countries in Europe that really started advocating for the rule of the markets over politics. And nowadays we see people with Brexit claiming back their sovereignty. Now, most people blame the European Union, but it's only to the extent to which the European Union is an anti-democratic institution, a neoliberal institution, that people can blame the EU for the lack of sovereignty that now exists in the United Kingdom. If you think about the European Union, there are a lot of things that the Brexiteers are right about. The European Union first of all, it's never been a union. We often call it the European disunion. From an economical point of view, there are laws that create competition between the member states. The European Union is the home of the only parliament in the world without legislative power.
Yeah,
and it's taken a lot of sovereignty away from the nations. The legislative power belongs to a commission of people who are not voted, but they are nominated into office. And we really see there within the European Commission the power that financial institutions have in terms of controlling the European institution. At the same time, when we talk about defending substantial democracy and fighting back on neoliberalism, we need institutions that are big enough to demonstrate that a different political, economical, and social model is possible. Now, that's why the the Brexit referendum was a lose-lose referendum for everyone, because by voting leave, you would have actually renounced to a political institution that could be capable in the future of opposing itself to undemocratic economical models. And also, the truth is that nobody of the people who advocated for Brexit did it in order to defend people's sovereignty. We are going to see the UK, if the UK is going to leave the European Union, we're going to see the United Kingdom more and more exposed to the international markets. We've recently seen that, for example, the NHS has got to be on the table in terms of reaching a deal with the US. So there are actually private and financial powers that will be profiting and benefiting from a further weakening of the political power within the United Kingdom. At the same time, if we voted Remain, if British people voted Remain, they would have actually accepted the idea of an undemocratic and divided European disunion that is not upholding the role that history originally assigned to the European Union. The European Union should have been the place where the welfare state was defended and promoted across every single country, and became a place where democracies were overhauled by economical and financial processes. So the Brexit referendum was a lose-lose referendum, and we should have instead demanded for a more political union where people are still, where the sovereignty still belongs to the people.
I think you mentioned very interesting topics. Of course, you mentioned Brexit, which, as we know, in England is still sort of all 3 years on. It's still a very much hot topic. And of course, we've got a general election looming. The general election in the UK is taking place next Thursday, and it's so interesting that across the main across the manifestos of the main parties, there's only the term neoliberalism, because we were talking about neoliberalism and how it affects everyday politics and policies as well. There's only one manifesto which mentioned the word neoliberal, and it's a Labour manifesto. Now, I don't want to go into so much details, but because as I said, the general election here in the UK is a very hot topic. What are your predictions for the general elections? Any how? Probably, I'm not going to ask how you think people should vote, but if you had to give like a 3-pointer guidance to people, to voters, what would you say to them? Also, still keeping in mind our challenge of neoliberalism and its idea of the world.
So the priority for politicians all around Europe and in the UK is to restore the rule of politics over economy. And that doesn't mean that we need to have a state-based economy where there is no space for private companies or institutions or multinationals or anything. It's about the rule of public interest over the rule of financial institutions. I think that this is the one pointer that that if we manage to achieve that, then we can still. Then there is nobody who's got a higher moral ground. I hate when I hear people from one political side or the other believing that they stand on a higher moral ground. That's not true. People have different points of view, and they have to be all respected. The problem is that all of these points of view, can compete with each other within a democratic environment. At the moment, we are at risk of compromising true democracy because financial dynamics are overhauling and negating and taking away a number of options from politicians and the legislative power. So that's the main issue. What I'm a bit worried about is that because Corbyn is nowadays saying it's a good thing. It's a good thing that the Labour manifesto is addressing it. In many ways, I do not see Corbyn's policies doing anything in terms of really fighting back on neoliberalism. I see old socialist policies that start from a number of assumptions that belong to the neoliberal ideology. The scarcity of currency. We have heard nowadays even Mario Draghi and Christine Lagarde. Christine Lagarde and Mario Draghi have been amongst the.
Can we just remind people that Mario Draghi was a former president of the Central European Bank, whereas Christine Lagarde is his successor.
Yeah, and before she was working at the IMF.
Yes, she was working at the
head of the IMF. They have been amongst the people who have really defended and helped neoliberal theories establish themselves around the world, around the whole of the globe, really, not only in Western countries, but even in Africa and a number of places. And lately, we have heard both of them talking about currencies as. We've heard both of them talking about the needs of considering currency as belonging to the people. We've heard both of them talking about the need to link.
Sorry to interrupt, Marco. They both were talking about expansive monetary policies.
They've both been talking about the need to link the European Central Bank to a political power. They've both been talking about Euro bonds. They've both been talking about. They've not only been talking about expansive economical measure. Mario Draghi actually talked about considering the modern monetary theory as an alternative to neoliberalism, and that is a complete radical shift because the modern monetary theory is the most radical of the Keynesian economical theories. So. Clearly, there is nowadays there are more advanced. We do not know whether actually Christine Lagarde and Mario Draghi will really go down the path that they have set themselves with these declarations. But I find much more interesting and progressive such ideas than the political program that was put forward by Jeremy Corbyn. I think that the moment Jeremy Corbyn we start talking about really the relationship between economy and democracy and how we can shift economical paradigm, that's the day that potential Labour will become a real alternative to neoliberalism.
And I guess the fight is still on, and I think we've just started walking in that kind of sort of direction. Can I just mention one book which I know we've both read is The Econocracy.
Yeah.
Sorry. Econocracy is exactly refers to what you just sort of talked about. The primacy of economy over politics. It says here on the back of the book, a century ago, the idea of the economy didn't exist. Now, economics is the supreme ideology of our time, with its own rules and language. The trouble is, most of us can't even speak it. It's organizing, and then, sorry, you go back page, goes on describing the book, which is a really interesting book to read, and in a way tells exactly how we at the Roosevelt Movement what we think, we need to restore the primary of politics over economy. And I think you're totally right when you say, as soon as there's a politician comes along that offers this kind of change, I think we should definitely embrace it. But I guess, as you just mentioned, the fight and the fight is still on, and we've just start seeing little changes, sort of granular mode. What do you think?
Absolutely, it's a very good book. I would recommend anybody to read it, because what really that book is it's really easy to read and understand. It shows how the neoliberal theories were established in the UK mainly, starting from the 90s, and how politicians have changed the way they operate since the neoliberal theories established itself. But I do not like the conclusions of that book, because in a way, at the end of that book, the authors see in Brexit a real opportunity to reclaim popular sovereignty. And that's a respectable point of view. I would recommend anybody to read it and consider that point of view. But at the same time, I would invite people to read another interesting book, which is Hayek's Trap and European Utopia We Need. It's a book by Van Parijs, VanParijs.
And what we do, we can put all these links.
We're going to put all of the links.
Video, we can put all the links underneath.
Absolutely, let's do that. Let's put those links in the description of the video. In this book, I think people should read The Iconocracy first, and then Van Parijs, because what Van Parijs is arguing is that by going back to national states, we are actually completing the realization of the neoliberal agenda. Because in order to fight back on an ideology that advocates for the rule of international markets over political power, we need an international political power to fight back on international markets. By going back to a national dimension, we do not have the we do not have any leverage against. We do not have any political leverage against the power of the international market. So maybe these two books can be a good Christmas read for anybody who was so kind to listen to us.
And of course, we're going to help our viewers fill out their Christmas stocking. We're going to put the links underneath the video. Marco, finally, we talk about the elections. So as you said, as you just mentioned, I think the fight against neoliberalism and the ideology of neoliberalism is still on, but I guess we've started seeing some possibly little moves in the right direction. And maybe, I don't know, any predictions for what's going to happen next Thursday? As I said to you, I don't want you to just tell people how to vote or what to vote, because in the Roosevelt Movement we are, we cut across political parties, we are open to ideas, we embrace different points of view. But if you had to ask voters one thing when they go in the voting booth, before they apply their tick, what would you suggest them?
What would you suggest them? Tell me.
Sorry?
What would you suggest them?
I suggest to vote with their. I want to say vote with their hearts, but probably it's not the right approach. I think they should definitely vote for, as you just said, for someone who they think should restore the primary of politics over the economy, because as you saw. As you've just seen, with all the things you've mentioned and we've talked about this morning, it's very important that the parameter of politics gets restored on a local level, on a national level, and also on an international level. And if they think there's any politician out there that's embracing that kind of change, that kind of ideal, I think they should definitely be welcome to do so and to give them their vote.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. Thank you very much for this. And I think that most people, I've heard a lot of people in the UK saying that they vote for what's convenient, for what serves their lives better. I think it's important to vote for what's right, and then in your everyday life you do what's best for you. But when people vote, they should vote for what's best for the society. So let's see what the British people will decide to vote next week.
Yeah. And I think you're right. If you vote for what's right, and then what's best for you in your life will absolutely follow suit. Michael, thank you very much. We've come to the end of our first video in English of our Roosevelt Movement series. Our next video will be probably up next month, the new year 2020.
Let's do that then.
To all viewers out there, thank you much for following us.
It's bloody hard to master this subject in your own language. You're going to get better at doing it in English. Don't worry, guys.
It's a good exercise. It will only get better.
We can only get better, absolutely.
Only get better. No, but we've well done to you as usual. You're the vice president of the Roosevelt Movement, and an amazing figure with the movement itself. So, Michael, thank you so much for your time, and to all viewers out there, I'll see you next month. Thank you. Bye.